They called her wild, they called her unfit, they called her a disgrace to her father's name. The whole town of Silver Bend whispered that she would lose everything within a year. The ranch, the cattle, her dignity. The banker sharpened his foreclosure papers like a man preparing for a feast. The mayor's wife smiled like a snake ready to strike. But when the dust-covered cowboy walked into that general store and heard them mock her one last time, he did not flinch. He looked straight at Arden Cole and said 5 words that would change everything. "Good, you will match me just fine." This is their story. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The summer heat of 1878 settled over Silver Bend, Colorado like a wool blanket soaked in creek water. Heavy, suffocating, impossible to escape. Main Street baked under the afternoon sun. The wooden boardwalks creaked with each step. Dust devils spun lazy circles between the saloon and the general store. It was the kind of day when sensible people stayed indoors. Even the horses stood still in their traces, tails flicking at flies. Arden Cole was not sensible. She had stopped being sensible the day they buried her father. She walked down Main Street with her head high and her jaw set. Her boots clicked against the weathered planks with the steady rhythm of a war drum. Her riding skirt was dusty from the morning's work. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid that had given up any pretense of ladylike arrangement. Sweat darkened the collar of her shirt. Dirt lined her fingernails. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent the dawn hours mending fence posts and checking water troughs while the rest of Silver Bend was still sleeping off Saturday night's whiskey. The whispers started before she reached the Mercantile. "There she goes again," one woman said to another. "Thinks she is a man." "Thomas Cole must be rolling in his grave," someone else muttered. "No doubt about it." "Give it 3 months," a man predicted from the saloon porch. "She will be begging to sell by autumn." Arden did not slow down. She did not turn her head. She did not give them the satisfaction of knowing their words, landed like thrown stones against her spine. She had learned that much in the 6 months since her father's heart had given out in the north pasture. 6 months since the lawyer had read the will in his dusty office. 6 months since the town had collectively decided that a 24-year-old woman had no business running a cattle ranch. The bell above the Mercantile door jangled as she pushed inside. The conversation that had been bubbling among the cluster of women near the fabric bolts died like a candle in a windstorm. Mrs. Eleanor Alden stood at the center of the group like a queen holding court. Her silk dress was so pristine it looked like she had never encountered actual dirt in her entire life. The mayor's wife had made it her personal mission to remind Arden of her place at every possible opportunity. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Why, Miss Cole, Mrs.?" Alden said with false sweetness. "How industrious of you to venture into town looking so authentic." The pause before that last word carried enough venom to drop a bull at 20 paces. Arden met her gaze evenly. "Mrs. Alden, ladies." She nodded to the other women. Most of them suddenly found the floor fascinating. She turned to the counter. "Mr. Peterson, I need 50 pounds of oats, 2 coils of rope, and whatever nails you have in stock. Put it on my account." Harold Peterson, the Mercantile owner, shifted uncomfortably behind his counter. He was a decent man. But decent men still had to pay their own bills, and the mayor's opinion carried weight in a town this size. "Miss Cole," he said carefully, "about that account, I will settle up after the fall sale," Arden said firmly but not unkindly. "Same as my father always did." Same as every rancher in this valley does. Your father, Mrs. Alden, interjected with dripping, false sympathy, had the respect of this community. He had experience. He had the proper constitution for such demanding work. The other women murmured agreement, a soft chorus of judgment wrapped in propriety. Ardan felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the anger that lived there now like a banked fire, always ready to flare. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself against these women who had never touched a branding iron, who had never birthed a calf, who had never ridden through a lightning storm to bring in strays. The bell jangled again. Every head in the store turned toward the door. And that was the moment Ardan Cole's life changed forever. The man who stepped through that mercantile door was tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the frame, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested hard work rather than bulk. His clothes were worn but clean. Dark trousers, a shirt that might have been blue once before the sun faded it. A bandana knotted loosely at his throat. Dust coated his boots and the lower half of his legs like he had walked through miles of dry country. A battered hat shadowed his face, but Ardan could see the sharp line of his jaw, the easy way he moved despite obvious fatigue. He was a stranger. Silver Bend did not get many strangers. The man paused just inside the doorway. His eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. His gaze swept the room with the careful attention of someone who had learned to assess situations quickly. He took in Peterson behind the counter. The cluster of well-dressed women, Ardan standing alone with dust on her clothes and defiance in her eyes. "Help you?" Peterson asked cautiously. "Need supplies," the stranger said. His voice was deep and roughened by trail dust. "And information, if you have got it. I am looking for work. Ranch work." There was an accent there, not strong but present. Texas, Ardan thought, or maybe Oklahoma. Mrs. Alden's laugh was like breaking glass. "Ranch work in Silver Bend," she said with cruel amusement. She gestured toward Ardan with a flutter of her gloved hand. "I am afraid our local attempt at ranching is not exactly positioned to hire help. The Cole Ranch is barely keeping its head above water, though I am sure Miss Cole appreciates the gesture of inquiry." The stranger's gaze shifted to Ardan, really seeing her for the first time. Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or assessment. "Cole Ranch," he repeated. "My family's ranch," Ardan said, lifting her chin. "And we are doing just fine." "Oh, my dear girl," Mrs. Alden's smile could have curdled milk. "Everyone knows you are drowning in debt. Your father's loans, the property taxes, the cost of maintaining that sprawling disaster of a homestead. It is only a matter of time." She paused for effect. "The kindest thing you could do is sell to someone with the actual capability to run it. My husband knows several interested parties who would offer fair prices." "Fair prices," Ardan repeated. Her voice was flat as a Kansas prairie. "Your husband's interested parties have offered exactly half what the land is worth, Mrs. Alden. We both know it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "How dare you suggest?" Mrs. Alden started. "I am not suggesting anything," Ardan interrupted. "I am stating facts. The Cole Ranch has been in my family for 30 years. It has water rights, timber rights, 300 head of prime cattle. It is not for sale at any price, and certainly not at the insulting figures your husband's friends have proposed." Mrs. Alden's face flushed an unbecoming shade of crimson. "You silly, foolish girl," she hissed. "You cannot run a ranch. You are a woman. You do not have the strength, the knowledge, the constitution for such work. You should be looking for a husband, not playing cowboy with your father's legacy. Playing cowboy? Arden's voice was dangerously quiet now. Is that what you think I am doing? What else would you call it? Mrs. Alden demanded. Riding around in men's clothes, barking orders at the few hands who have not abandoned you yet, pretending you understand the first thing about cattle or markets. I call it surviving, Arden said. Each word was clipped and precise. I call it honoring my father's life work. I call it refusing to let vultures like your husband pick apart everything Thomas Cole built just because I have the audacity to be his daughter instead of his son. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Peterson had frozen with a bolt of fabric halfway off the shelf behind him. The stranger cleared his throat. Every eye in the room swiveled back to him. He had been watching the exchange with an expression that was hard to read, part amusement, part something else. Interest, maybe. He pushed his hat back slightly, revealing more of his face. He was younger than Arden had initially thought, maybe 35, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that were somewhere between blue and gray, like storm clouds over the plains. Seems to me, he said slowly, his drawl was more pronounced now, that a woman running a ranch on her own in country like this has more constitution than most men I have known. He looked directly at Mrs. Alden. More guts, too. Mrs. Alden's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. The stranger turned his full attention to Arden. You say you are doing fine, but are you hiring? Arden blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden shift. What? Hiring, he repeated. Ranch work. That is what I am looking for. You have got a ranch? I am guessing from this conversation that you could use the help. Politics aside. And in that moment, standing in a dusty mercantile with judgment raining down around her, Arden Cole found herself face to face with the man who would change everything. She just did not know it yet. Arden studied the stranger with the suspicion of a woman who had been burned too many times before. I do not know you, she said carefully. You could be anyone. Could be, he agreed easily. Name is Calder Brooks. Worked ranches from the Rio Grande to Wyoming. Can show you my hands if you want proof of honest work. He held them out, palms up. They were calloused and scarred in the way that only came from years of rope burns, barbed wire, hard labor. Miss Cole does not have the resources to pay proper wages, Mrs. Alden interjected. She had recovered her composure, though her face was still flushed. She can barely pay the men she currently employs. Did not ask about pay, Calder said without looking at her. His eyes stayed on Arden. Asked about work. Arden felt something shift in her chest. The stranger was either crazy or exactly what she needed. Maybe both. Standard wages, she heard herself say. Room and board in the bunkhouse. You will take orders from me or from Rafa Delgado, my foreman. You will work from dawn to dark during busy season. She paused. I do not tolerate drinking on the job, stealing, or men who think they know better than me just because they are men. The corner of Calder's mouth twitched. Sounds reasonable. It is a hard life, Arden continued as if he had not spoken. The work is brutal. The ranch is struggling. We are fighting for every acre right now. The bank is breathing down our necks. The mayor's office is trying to force a sale, and half the town is taking bets on when I will fail. She met his eyes directly. Why would you want any part of that? Calder was quiet for a moment, his storm-colored gaze holding hers with an intensity that made something flutter in her stomach. Then he said a single word. "Good?" Arden frowned. "Good." That almost smile became a real one. It transformed his weather-beaten face into something that made Arden's breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. He tipped his hat to her, then turned that smile on Mrs. Alden and her shocked companions. "Good," he repeated, his voice carried to every corner of the now silent mercantile. "You will match me just fine." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Mrs. Alden made a strangled sound of outrage. The other women erupted into scandalized whispers. Peterson looked like he was trying to decide whether to laugh or hide behind his counter. Arden felt something unfamiliar and dangerous unfurl in her chest. Hope, maybe, or recognition. The sense that this stranger with dust on his boots and a Texas drawl had just chosen her side in a war he did not even fully understand yet. "The ranch is 5 miles northwest," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Stone gate posts. Coal brand carved into the left one. You will find it before dark if you leave now." Calder touched his hat brim in acknowledgment. "I will be there." He turned to Peterson. "I will take those supplies for Miss Cole and add a pound of coffee to her order. Looks like she could use it." Before Arden could protest, before Mrs. Alden could recover enough to launch another verbal assault, Calder was at the counter, coins appearing in his work roughened hand. Peterson, looking grateful for an excuse to move, began gathering the requested items with unprecedented speed. "You cannot just—" Arden started. "Call it an advance on my first wages," Calder said over his shoulder. "I will work it off." "But you do not. 5 miles northwest. Stone gates. Coal brand. Got it?" He collected the bundle of supplies Peterson had hastily wrapped, then paused at the door. He looked back at Arden one more time, and this time there was something almost like a promise in his expression. "See you before sundown, Miss Cole." Then he was gone, the bell jangling in his wake, leaving Arden standing in the middle of the mercantile with her heart racing and her mind spinning and Mrs. Alden's fury crackling through the air like heat lightning. "Well, Mrs. Alden," said icily, "I suppose that is the caliber of help you can attract. Drifters and saddle tramps who do not even ask about wages. How perfectly fitting." Arden did not answer. She was still staring at the door, at the empty space where Calder Brooks had been standing. Something had just changed. Something fundamental. She did not understand it yet, did not dare name it, but she felt it in her bones the way she felt coming storms. "You will match me just fine." What kind of man saw a woman fighting alone against an entire town and decided that was exactly the kind of fight he wanted to join? "My supplies, Mr. Peterson," Arden said quietly, turning back to the counter. "Already wrapped, Miss Cole," Peterson said. His voice was carefully neutral about the account. "I will settle it after fall sale," Arden repeated. "Same terms as always." Peterson glanced nervously at Mrs. Alden, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. After fall." It was a small victory, but Arden would take it. She collected her parcels, kept her spine straight, and walked out of that mercantile with the same steady dignity she had walked in with. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let Mrs. Alden spread whatever poison she wanted through the ladies' sewing circle and the Sunday church social. Arden Cole had work to do. The ride back to the ranch took an hour, long enough for the adrenaline of the confrontation to fade and reality to settle back in like morning frost. The Cole Ranch spread across a valley carved by Silver Creek. The grass was still green in August. The ponderosa pines climbed the slopes like dark green walls. It was beautiful country, hard country, the kind of land that would break you if you were not careful, but reward you with breathtaking sunsets and clean water and cattle that practically raised themselves if you gave them half a chance. Thomas Cole had built this place from nothing. He had arrived in Colorado Territory in '48 with a wife and a wagon and dreams bigger than the mountains. He had fought drought, fought winters that killed half his stock, fought claim jumpers and rustlers and every other hardship the frontier could throw at a man. And he had won. For 30 years he had won. He had built a house that did not leak, a barn that could withstand spring storms, corrals that held the wildest Mustang. He had run cattle when the market was good and lived on beans and determination when it was not. He had raised a daughter who could read and write and shoot and ride with equal skill, who knew every inch of this land, who loved it with the same fierce passion he had. Then his heart had stopped in the middle of checking the north fence line, and Arden's world had caught fire. She spotted the stone gate posts from a quarter-mile away, the Cole brand carved deep into the weathered granite. Home. Except it did not feel like home anymore. It felt like a fortress under siege, and she was the only one defending the walls. The ranch house sat in a grove of cottonwoods, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch that her father had added the year before he died. The barn stood to the east. Red paint fading, but the structure still sound. Beyond that, the bunkhouse, the equipment shed, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, all the pieces that made a working ranch function. And standing in front of the barn watching her approach with faded eyes and a tobacco-stained beard was Rafa Delgado. Rafa had been with her father from the beginning. He had helped build the first cabin, helped deliver Arden when her mother had gone into unexpected labor during a blizzard, helped bury that same woman when fever took her 6 years later. He was 63 years old, tough as boot leather, and loyal as a hound dog. He was also one of only 2 hands who had stayed after Thomas Cole died. "Trouble in town?" Rafa asked as Arden dismounted. "When is there not?" Arden replied. She handed him her reins. Mrs. Alden was in rare form. Rafa spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That woman has got a tongue sharp enough to skin a bear." "She thinks I should sell," Arden said. "Thinks I am an embarrassment to my father's memory." "Your father?" Rafa's voice went rough, the way it always did when he talked about Thomas. "Would have been proud as hell of what you are doing here. Do not let them poison you with their talk." Arden managed a tired smile. "I hired someone today." Rafa's eyebrows shot up. "Hired? With what money?" "Standard wages, same as everyone else," Arden said. She paused. He did not ask about the pay, just asked about the work. Rafa's eyes narrowed. "What kind of fool takes a job without asking about wages?" "The kind who walked into Peterson's Mercantile right in the middle of Mrs. Alden tearing me apart and decided to defend me to her face." Arden shook her head, still not quite believing it herself. "Name is Calder Brooks. Says he has worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming. He will be here before dark." Rafa studied her face with the perceptive gaze of someone who had known her since birth. "And you believe him?" "I do not know," Arden admitted. "But we need the help, Rafa. We have got 200 head to move before first snow. Fences that will not survive another storm, and water rights to defend if the Mallister Ranch keeps trying to dam the creek upstream. We can not do it with just you and Tommy." Tommy Garrett was their other remaining hand. a kid barely 18 who was more enthusiasm than skill. But he worked harder than men twice his age. It was not enough, not for what they needed to accomplish before winter. Guess we will see what kind of man this Brooks fellow is, Rafa said finally. If he is running from something, or if he is the real deal. If he shows up at all, Ardan added. For all I know, he was just making a point to Mrs. Alden, and he will ride past the gate without stopping. But she did not believe that. Something in the way Calder Brooks had looked at her, the steadiness in his storm-colored eyes, told her he was a man who kept his promises. The sun was touching the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold when Arden heard the sound of hoofbeats on the drive. She was in the barn checking on a mare that had shown signs of colic that morning, her hands full of sweet feed and concern. "Someone is coming," Tommy called from the barn door. The kid had been watching the road like he expected an invasion. Ardan wiped her hands on her trousers and stepped out into the fading light. Calder Brooks rode a big buckskin gelding, the kind of horse that could go all day and still have energy to spare. He had acquired a bedroll and saddlebag since leaving town, which meant he either had them stashed somewhere or he traveled so light that everything he owned could be carried on one horse. Given the worn state of his clothes, Ardan suspected the latter. He reined in 20 feet from the barn, a polite distance that showed respect for her space. Up close in better light, Ardan could see she had been wrong about his age. There were lines around his eyes that suggested he was closer to 35, and a scar that cut white through his left eyebrow. "Miss Cole," he said, touching his hat brim. "Mr. Brooks." Ardan felt Rafa and Tommy both positioning themselves behind her, protective without being obvious about it. "You found us. Was not hard. You give good directions." He glanced around the ranch yard, his gaze taking in details with the practiced eye of someone who knew what to look for. "Nice spread," he said. "Good water, good grass. Your father built something solid here." "He did," Ardan agreed. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Once you are on Cole payroll, you are going to be on the wrong side of town politics. Mrs. Alden will make sure everyone knows you are working for the wild Cole girl." Calder's expression did not change. Never cared much for politics or gossip. He swung down from his saddle with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in a saddle than out of one. "You mentioned a foreman. Rafa Delgado?" "That is me." Rafa stepped forward. He looked Calder up and down with the blunt assessment of a man who had hired and fired dozens of ranch hands over 30 years. "You know cattle?" Rafa asked. "Yes, sir." "You know horses?" "Yes, sir." "You know how to fix fence, dig post holes, work a branding iron, and ride through a thunderstorm without losing your nerve?" Calder's mouth twitched. "I do." "And you are willing to take orders from a woman half your age?" "If that woman knows what she is talking about," Calder said, "I do not see why not." Rafa and Calder stared at each other for a long moment. Then Rafa nodded slowly. "Bunkhouse is that building there. Bunks on the right are taken, me and Tommy. You can have your pick of the rest. Meals are at dawn, noon, and dusk. Miss Cole does the cooking, and it is good, so do not waste it. We start work at first light. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Do not call me sir. Makes me feel old." Rafa jerked his head toward the bunkhouse. "Get settled. We will talk about tomorrow's work after supper." Calder nodded, gathered his horse's reins, and headed toward the barn. Ardan watched him go, still trying to reconcile the reality of this stranger with the audacity of what he had said in the mercantile. "You will match me just fine." "Well," Tommy said, his young voice bright with curiosity, "he seems all right." "We will see," Rafa muttered. But there was something in the old man's eyes that looked almost like approval. The work fell into a rhythm over the following weeks, brutal, endless, but with a sense of progress that Ardan had not felt in months. Calder worked from dawn until dark without complaint, proving himself capable with everything from breaking horses to doctoring sick calves. Tommy followed him around like a puppy, soaking up knowledge and asking endless questions that Calder answered with surprising patience. Even Rafa, who trusted new people about as much as he trusted rattlesnakes, grudgingly admitted that Brooks knew his business. But it was the confrontation with Mallister that changed everything. 3 weeks after Calder's arrival, Ardan rode out to check the water situation upstream. Mallister had been damming Silver Creek again, diverting water that belonged to the Cole Ranch. Calder rode with her. They found the dam a mile upstream, a crude but effective barrier of logs, stones, and mud that diverted most of the creek into a ditch leading toward Mallister property. The main channel was reduced to a trickle barely 6 inches deep. "Son of a gun," Ardan muttered, dismounting. "This is worse than last time." Calder swung down from his saddle and walked to the dam, examining it with a critical eye. "He has got help building this," he observed. "One man could not move these logs alone." "He has got 4 hands and 2 sons," Ardan said. "They probably built it overnight." She was already pulling her work gloves from her saddlebag. "Help me tear it down." They had just started prying logs loose when 3 riders appeared from the tree line. Mallister and his sons. The rancher was a big man in his 50s with a gray beard and expensive boots. His sons had his same square jaw and mean eyes. "Well, well," Mallister called out, reining in his horse 20 feet away. "Looks like we have got trespassers destroying private property." "This is not your property," Ardan said, keeping her voice level. "This is the creek bed, public land. That dam is mine, though, and you are tearing it apart." Mallister's smile was all teeth. "That is destruction of property, Miss Cole. I could have the sheriff out here for this." "Do it," Ardan said flatly. "I would love to explain to Sheriff Morrison why you are illegally diverting water from someone with senior rights." Again. "Senior rights," Mallister spat the words like they tasted bad. "Your father might have filed first, but you are not using that water properly. Running too many cattle, overgrazing the land, wasting resources." "That is a lie," Ardan interrupted, her anger flaring hot and bright. "I am running the exact same herd my father ran on the same grazing schedule with the same rotation patterns." "Miss Cole." Calder's voice was quiet but firm. He stepped slightly in front of her, not blocking her but creating a physical buffer between her and Mallister. "I am Calder Brooks," he said, "new hand at the Cole Ranch. I have worked cattle operations from Texas to Wyoming, and I can tell you that Miss Cole's herd management is textbook perfect. She is not overstocked, not overgrazing, and not wasting anything." Mallister's eyes narrowed. "I know every hand in this valley. Never heard of you." "That is because I just arrived." Calder's tone remained conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made his words hit harder. "But I know water law, and I know cattle management, and I know you are violating both. Now you can file complaints with the water commissioner all you want. I hear he is your brother-in-law, so I am sure he will listen real sympathetic, but the law is the law. And Miss Cole has senior rights dating back to 1851. That is going to hold up in any court you care to try. You do not know what you are talking about, one of Mallister's sons growled. I know exactly what I am talking about, Calder replied, still in that same easy tone. I also know that stealing water from a neighboring ranch is a good way to start a range war. And range wars have a tendency to get expensive and bloody. Does not seem worth it just to irrigate some alfalfa. Mallister's face had gone red. Are you threatening me? No, sir. Just observing that you are making a serious mistake. Miss Cole has been patient so far. More patient than a lot of ranchers would be. But patience runs out eventually. He gestured at the partially dismantled dam. This is the third time she has had to tear down your illegal diversions. Maybe it is time to accept that Silver Creek is not yours to control. She is a woman, Mallister said, as if that explained everything. She does not have the spine or the resources to fight me in court, and she certainly does not have the backing to make trouble for me with the water commissioner or anyone else who matters in this county. Calder's voice was quiet but steady as he spoke the words that would become legend in Silver Bend for years to come. She has me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mallister stared at Calder, clearly trying to figure out whether this dusty cowboy was bluffing or if he actually represented a real threat. Arden felt something shift in her chest. Surprise, gratitude, and something more complicated that she was not ready to name. This man had known her for less than a month, and he was standing between her and trouble like he had been hired to do exactly that. You are making a mistake, Mallister said finally, directing his words at Calder rather than Arden. Cole Ranch is going under. Bank is going to foreclose before Christmas. Whatever wages she promised you, you will not see them. That is my concern, not yours, Calder replied. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Mallister jerked his horse's head around viciously and spurred it back toward the tree line, his sons following with backward glances that promised future trouble. Arden waited until they disappeared before letting out the breath she had been holding. Thank you, she said quietly. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Calder said. Turning back to the dam, that is what you are paying me for. I am paying you to fix fences and work cattle, not face down my neighbors. Calder pulled another log free, muscles straining under his shirt. Way, I see it. Protecting this ranch includes protecting you from men who think they can push you around just because you are a woman. That is part of the job. You meant what you said, Arden said, about standing with me. Calder stopped working and looked at her directly. I do not say things I do not mean, Miss Cole. And in that moment, Arden Cole realized that something had changed, something fundamental. She was not fighting alone anymore. One evening, 6 weeks after Calder's arrival, they were sitting on the porch after supper while Rafa and Tommy played cards in the bunkhouse. The sun had set an hour ago. The first stars were appearing over the eastern peaks. Arden was reviewing the ranch accounts, or trying to anyway. The numbers kept blurring together, mocking her with their insufficiency. How bad is it? Calder asked. He was sitting on the porch steps, working oil into a bridle that had started to crack. Arden did not pretend to misunderstand. The bank loan is due in 6 weeks. I need $3,000. She checked the ledger again, hoping the numbers might have magically changed. I have 843. Calder's hands stilled on the leather. What about the cattle? When is the fall sale? Not until November. And even if I sell every head at top price, I will maybe clear 1,500 after expenses." She closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "I am $2,000 short, and I have no way to get it." "What if you sold some land?" "To who?" Ardan asked. "The only people with that kind of cash are the mayor's friends, and they are offering pennies on the dollar. They know I am desperate, so they are waiting for the bank to force me into a sale at rock bottom." Ardan fought against the tightness in her throat. 6 weeks? That is all I have got left before this place becomes someone else's property. Calder set the bridle aside and stood, crossing to lean against the porch railing where he could see her face in the lamplight spilling through the window. "What about taking the herd to Cheyenne?" Ardan blinked. "What?" "Cheyenne," Calder repeated. "Prices are double there. Sometimes triple, depending on the market. It is a risk. Long drive. Lots of things that can go wrong. But if you made it, you would have enough to pay the bank and have capital left over." He paused. "It is a long shot, but it is still a shot." Ardan felt her heart begin to pound. "That is a 200-mile drive through rough country," she said, even as her mind started racing through the logistics. "We would need at least 4 drivers, probably 5. We would need supplies. A chuck wagon, enough horses for remounts." "We have got 4 drivers," Calder said. "Me, you, Rafa, Tommy. Tommy is 18 and has never done a drive that long. Then he will learn." Calder's voice was calm and confident. "And I have done drives twice that distance. Rafa has forgotten more about cattle than most men ever learn. You can ride and rope better than half the cowboys I have worked with." He met her eyes steadily. "It is possible, Ardan. Difficult, but possible." She noticed he had used her first name, but she was too caught up in the idea to call him on it. "The bank would never extend my loan to give us time for the drive. So we do not ask for an extension, we just do it." Calder's voice was steady. "We leave in a week, push hard, make Cheyenne in 3 weeks, sell the herd, get back here with time to spare before the loan comes due. And if something goes wrong, if we lose cattle, if there is a stampede, if we do not get the prices we need, then we are no worse off than we are now." Calder pointed out the obvious truth. "You are already losing the ranch. This way at least you are fighting for it instead of just watching it slip away." Ardan stared at him, at this man who had been in her life less than 2 months, but was already proposing the kind of desperate gamble that could save everything or destroy what little remained. The smart move was to say no. The safe move was to accept defeat gracefully, take whatever the mayor's friends offered, start over somewhere else. But Ardan Cole had never been particularly smart or safe. "If it is a long shot," she said slowly, "it is still a shot." She took a deep breath. "We do it. We take the herd to Cheyenne." Calder's smile was brilliant in the darkness. Proud, relieved, and something else that made Ardan's heart skip unexpectedly. "Then we had better start planning. We have got a lot of work to do." They stayed up late that night, mapping routes and calculating supplies, arguing over which cattle to take and which to leave behind, planning for every contingency they could imagine. Rafa joined them eventually, drawn by the lamplight and the sound of their voices, and after initial skepticism agreed that a Cheyenne drive was their best chance. "It is crazy," the old foreman said, but he was grinning. Thomas would have loved it. He always did appreciate a good gamble when the odds were long enough. "Then we will do it for him," Ardan said. "One last impossible thing before the ranch passes out of Cole's hands forever." But even as she said it, looking at Calder across the table with maps spread between them and hope kindling bright in her chest. She did not believe they were going to fail. For the first time in 6 months, Arden Cole believed they might actually win. 2 days before their planned departure, Mayor Alden appeared at the ranch, riding up the drive in his fine buggy like he was paying a social call rather than circling wounded prey. Arden met him in the yard with Calder working nearby in deliberate earshot, mending tack on the porch. "Miss Cole," Alden said, descending from his buggy with practiced political grace, "I have heard some concerning rumors about your intentions." "Then you have heard I am taking my cattle to Cheyenne," Arden said flatly. "Not rumors, facts." Alden's smile was oily with false concern. "My dear girl, you cannot possibly be serious. A drive of that length through that terrain with your limited resources. It is suicide. You will lose half your herd before you are halfway there." "That is my concern, not yours, Mayor." "But it is my concern," Alden insisted, his tone turning paternal in a way that made Arden's teeth grind. "As a civic leader, I feel responsible for the well-being of all our citizens, especially young women who might be making rash decisions born of desperation." "There is nothing rash about it," Calder said from the porch, not looking up from the bridle he was working on. "It is calculated risk, properly planned, which is more than can be said for most business ventures in this territory." Alden's face tightened. "I was not speaking to you, Mr. Brooks." "No, but you are talking about my employer's business, which makes it my concern." Calder did look up then, his gray eyes cool and direct. "Unless you have legal authority to prevent Miss Cole from conducting commerce, I suggest you save your breath for people who want your advice." The mayor's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "Miss Cole, I implore you to reconsider. If it is the bank loan that is driving this desperate action, I am certain we could work out alternative arrangements. A sale at fair market value, perhaps, with enough profit for you to establish yourself comfortably elsewhere." "Get off my property," Arden said quietly. Alden blinked. "I beg your pardon. You heard me. Get off my property before I have Mr. Brooks escort you off." She took a step closer and had the satisfaction of seeing the mayor actually retreat. "You and your friends have been waiting for me to fail since the day my father died. You have manipulated the bank, spread rumors, tried to steal my water rights, done everything possible to force me into selling at a fraction of what this ranch is worth." Her voice was steady but fierce. "But I am not failing, Mayor. I am fighting. And when I come back from Cheyenne with enough money to pay that loan in full, I am going to remember every single person who tried to profit from my grief." Alden's face had gone an unhealthy shade of red. "You are making a grave mistake, Miss Cole. This community has been patient with your eccentricities, but there are limits to public tolerance." "Then it is a good thing I do not require public tolerance," Arden replied. "Just legal rights, which I have. Now leave." The mayor climbed back into his buggy with wounded dignity, but his eyes promised retribution as he drove away. Arden watched until the dust settled, then discovered her hands were shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. "That went well," Calder observed dryly. "I just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county." "You already had that enemy. You just stopped pretending otherwise." Calder set aside his work and stood, crossing to where she stood in the yard. "You did good, Arden, standing up to men like that. It is harder than any physical work we will do on this drive." "I am terrified," she admitted quietly. "What if he is right? What if this is suicide, and I am just too stubborn to see it. Then we fail, Calder said simply. But we fail trying, which is better than the alternative, and we might not fail at all. We might just surprise everyone, including ourselves. Ardan looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift deeper in her chest, something that had been building since that first day in the mercantile. This man believed in her, not in some abstract way, not with condescension or pity, but with genuine conviction that she was capable of extraordinary things. Why? She asked. Why do you have so much faith in this, in me? Calder was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on hers. Because I have spent 15 years watching people give up when things got hard, watched ranches fail because the owners did not have the spine to fight for them, watched good land go to waste because someone decided it was easier to quit than to try. He paused. You are not a quitter, Ardan. You have got steel in you that most people never find, and that is worth betting on. They left at dawn on a Thursday morning in early September, driving 280 head of prime coal ranch cattle toward a horizon that promised either salvation or ruin. Ardan rode point with Calder, while Rafa and Tommy brought up the rear and flanks, their voices rising in the calls and whistles that kept the herd moving in the right direction. The first 2 days were deceptively easy. The weather held clear and cool. The cattle moved well. They covered better distance than Ardan had dared hope. But on the third day, the sky turned dark with clouds that moved fast from the west. Lightning flickered in the distance. The cattle grew nervous, fractious. Storm is coming, Rafa announced, reading the sky with the expertise of 40 years. Big one. How big? Ardan asked, though she could feel it herself, that electric tension in the air. Big enough that we need to find shelter, Rafa said. There is a draw about 2 miles northeast. It will break the worst of the wind. They pushed the herd hard toward the draw, racing the storm as lightning began to crack closer. The cattle were spooked now, rolling their eyes, fighting against the direction the riders wanted them to go. They reached the draw just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, cold as creek water and hard enough to sting exposed skin. Then the full force of the storm hit. Rain became a solid wall of water. Wind screamed through the draw, bending trees and tearing at anything not secured. Lightning cracked so close, Ardan could smell the ozone. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the ground. And then the cattle broke. It started with the animals at the edge of the herd. One moment they were holding position, the next they were running, blind with panic, and the instinct spread through the group like wildfire. 280 head of cattle transformed into a living avalanche of horns and hooves in mindless fear, stampeding directly toward a ravine that would kill anything that went over the edge. "Turn them!" Calder was shouting, but Ardan was already moving, spurring her mare directly into the path of the panicked herd. It was insane, suicidal, the kind of thing her father had always warned her never to do. But if she did not turn the leaders, the entire herd would go over that ravine, and 6 months of work would die in seconds. She fired her pistol into the air, the sharp crack cutting through even the storm's noise. Once, twice, 3 times. Each shot aimed at making the led cattle veer away from the ravine's edge. Her mare was screaming beneath her, fighting the bit, terrified, but trusting Ardan enough to stay the course. The herd was 30 feet away, 20. Ardan could see the whites of their eyes, see the foam at their mouths, feel the ground shaking with the force of their passage. 10 feet. Something massive and buckskin appeared at her side. Calder on his gelding. adding his own gunfire to hers, putting himself between her and the worst of the danger. Together they created enough noise and obstruction that the led cattle finally veered, turning away from the ravine by mere yards, and the rest of the herd followed in a sweeping arc that took them parallel to the drop instead of over it. They rode with the stampede for a quarter-mile, keeping pace with the panicked animals, firing and shouting until the cattle finally began to slow. By the time the herd came to a scattered heaving halt, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind steady rain and the distant rumble of retreating thunder. Arden's hands were shaking so badly she could barely holster her gun. Her mare was lathered with sweat and rain, but miraculously uninjured. Calder was beside her, his face grim and pale beneath the water streaming from his hat. "That," he said, his voice rough, "was the stupidest, bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. Had to be done," Arden managed. Though her own voice was shaking, "You could have been killed. If your horse had stumbled, if you had been a second too slow." He cut himself off, jaw working. "Do not ever do that again." "Do not tell me what to do," Arden shot back, adrenaline making her sharp. "They are my cattle, my responsibility, and you are no good to this ranch dead." Calder's voice was flat. "Next time we turn them together, you do not ride into a stampede alone. There might not be time for together, then we make time, or we lose cattle. But we do not lose you." His eyes were fierce, and his pale face, "Understand." Arden stared at him, breathing hard, and saw something in his expression that made her breath catch for entirely different reasons. This was not just about the cattle or the ranch. This was personal. This was Calder Brooks, terrified that he had just watched her die. "I understand," she said quietly. Miraculously, they had lost only 3 head. 1 cow with a broken leg that had to be put down, and 2 calves they could not find in the aftermath. The next week tested them in ways the storm had not. The rain had turned the trail to mud that sucked at hooves. They lost 2 more head to injury. One of the horses came up lame. Food ran low. They were all exhausted and filthy. On the 11th night, Arden took first watch while the others slept. The cattle were settled. The stars were brilliant overhead. Calder appeared beside her. "Cannot sleep?" she asked. "Slept enough. Figured you could use company." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the herd. Then Calder said something that made her heart stop. "You are going to make it, you know, to Cheyenne, through winter. Through whatever else tries to break you, you are going to make it because you are too stubborn to do anything else." Arden felt her throat tighten. "I am scared," she admitted. "Every day, every mile. I am terrified that this is the moment everything falls apart." "I know," he said quietly, "but you keep moving anyway. That is what courage is. Being scared and doing it anyway. Is that what you have been doing all those years of drifting? Were you scared?" Calder considered the question. "Different kind of scared. I was afraid of staying, of investing in something that might fail, of caring about people who might leave or die or disappoint me. So I kept moving, kept my distance, never let anything matter too much." He paused. "Turns out that is its own kind of failure. Running does not make you safe, it just makes you alone." "And now?" Arden asked, her heart beating faster. "Now I am tired of running." Calder turned to look at her directly, and even in the darkness she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I have never seen anyone fight this hard for a dream, for a place, for a legacy. It makes a man think about staying, about having something worth fighting for himself. The moments stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid and promises neither of them quite dared to make. "I am glad you stayed," she said. "I do not think I could do this without you." "You could," Calder said. "You would find a way. But I am glad I am here to see it." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was rough with calluses, gentle with intent, and Arden felt that touch like lightning through her entire body. "Ardan," he said, her name rough in his mouth. "When this is over—" A wolf howled close enough to make them both turn sharply toward the sound. Then another howl answered, and another, coming from multiple directions around the herd. "Wake the others," Ardan said, her hand already on her rifle. No, the next hour was chaos. The wolves came in a pack, at least 7 or 8 animals, circling the herd and testing the defenses. Arden and Calder ended up back to back at one point, surrounded by circling shadows with gleaming eyes. She could feel the solid warmth of his shoulders against hers, could hear his steady breathing as he tracked targets in the darkness. "Left side," he said calmly. Arden swung her rifle and fired, the muzzle flash illuminating a gray shape that yelped and retreated. 2 more appeared on the right, and Calder's gun spoke twice in quick succession. They held that position for what felt like hours, protecting each other's blind spots, moving in unconscious synchronization that came from trust and necessity. When the wolves finally gave up and melted back into the darkness, both of them were shaking with adrenaline and relief. "You all right?" Calder asked, turning to check her over in the dim light. "I am fine." "You fine." That was too close. "Everything about this drive has been too close," Ardan said, and surprised herself by laughing. It came out slightly hysterical, born of exhaustion and fear, and the sheer absurdity of their situation. Storms, stampedes, wolves. What is next? Locusts. "Do not tempt fate," Calder said. "I think fate stopped paying attention to us about 200 miles ago." But she was smiling, and so was he. And in that moment, standing together in the aftermath of danger, Ardan realized something had changed between them. Something had been acknowledged, even if not spoken aloud. They reached Cheyenne 4 days later, arriving at the stockyards with 268 head of exhausted but healthy cattle. Arden barely remembered the final miles. They blurred together in a haze of fatigue and desperate determination. But she remembered the moment she saw the city on the horizon, remembered the way her throat had closed with relief and disbelief that they had actually made it. The stockyard manager took one look at their herd and whistled appreciatively. "That is prime stock, miss. Where did you drive from?" "Silver Bend, Colorado," Ardan said, dismounting on legs that barely held her. 200 miles. 200. The manager blinked. "And you are the owner?" "I am the owner," Ardan confirmed, too tired to care about his surprise. "When is the next auction?" "Tomorrow afternoon. But if you are interested, I have got a buyer here now who is looking for exactly this kind of quality. Chicago meat packer, paying top dollar, save you the auction fees and the weight." Ardan's heart started pounding. How much? I would have to let him make the offer. But these are good animals, well fed, healthy despite the long drive. I would say $23 a head minimum, maybe more if he is feeling generous. $23 a head. Ardan did the math quickly. With 268 head, that was over $6,000, more than double what she needed for the bank, more than enough to save the ranch and have capital left over. "Set up the meeting," she heard herself say. "I will negotiate directly." The buyer turned out to be a hard-eyed man from Chicago who tried to intimidate Ardan into accepting $18 a head. She stood her ground, cited market prices and the quality of her stock, refused to budge below 22. They settled at $23.50, and Ardan walked away from the negotiation with a check for $6,178. She stared at the slip of paper in her hand, this proof that the impossible had just happened, and felt tears burn hot behind her eyes. They had done it against every odd, every prediction, every voice that said she would fail. They had done it. Calder found her standing outside the stockyard office, staring at the check like it might disappear. He took one look at her face and smiled, slow and proud and brilliant. "You did it," he said. "We did it," Ardan corrected. "I could not have made it without you, without any of you." Maybe Calder aloud, "But you are the one who had the courage to try. That is what made the difference." Ardan looked at this man who had appeared in her life when she had needed him most, who had stood beside her through storms and stampedes and wolves, who had believed in her when belief seemed like the most foolish thing in the world. "Thank you," she said, and knew the words were inadequate for everything she felt, for staying, for fighting with me, for making me believe this was possible. Calder's expression softened into something that made Ardan's breath catch. "I told you from the start, Ardan. You match me just fine." They rode back to Silver Bend 5 days later, traveling light without a herd to slow them down. The town looked exactly the same when they arrived, the same dusty main street, the same weathered buildings, the same people who had written her off. But Ardan felt different. She sat straighter in her saddle, met the startled stares with level confidence, and rode directly to the bank. Harold Peterson was sweeping his front step when they passed, and his jaw actually dropped. "Miss Cole, we heard the rumors." "Rumors said I would fail," Ardan called back pleasantly. Rumors were wrong. The bank was a small brick building at the corner of Main and First. The clerk behind the counter looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from bored to shocked. "Miss Cole," he stammered, "we were not expecting. That is, the payment is not due for another." "I am aware of the due date," Ardan said calmly. "Please inform Mr. Garrett that I am here to settle my account in full." The clerk practically ran to the back office. Then Jonathan Garrett emerged, the bank manager and Mayor Alden's brother-in-law, his round face flushed with confusion and something that looked like dismay. "Miss Cole," he said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes, "this is unexpected. The loan is not due for 3 more weeks, and I must say I am surprised to see you have returned from your venture." "Successful venture," Ardan corrected. She reached into her coat and pulled out the bank draft, placing it on the counter with deliberate precision. $6,178 from Stockman's Bank of Cheyenne. $3,000 to settle the loan in full plus interest. The remainder I will be depositing into a new account under my name. Garrett stared at the draft like it was a snake. "This is." "Where did you—" "Cattle drive to Cheyenne," Ardan said, letting satisfaction color her voice. 268 heads sold at premium prices, as I told you I would. When you tried to convince me to sell the ranch for half its value. Now, Miss Cole, that is hardly fair." "What is not fair?" Ardan interrupted, her tone hardening. "Is a bank manager conspiring with the mayor to force an early loan payment in hopes of triggering foreclosure. What is not fair is spreading rumors about my financial situation to potential buyers, trying to drive down the property value. What is not fair is treating me like an incompetent child instead of a legitimate rancher with legal rights. She leaned forward. Process the payment, Mr. Garrett, and give me the receipt showing zero balance owed. The banker's hands shook slightly as he processed the transaction. When Garrett finally pushed the receipt across the counter, his expression was sour enough to curdle milk. "Congratulations, Miss Cole," he said stiffly. "Your loan is satisfied. Will there be anything else?" "Yes," Arden said. "I am opening a business account with the remaining $3,000, and I want you to note in your records that the Cole Ranch is no longer a credit risk." She paused. "In fact, we are expanding operations. So the next time someone asks about my financial situation, you tell them the truth, that I am solvent, successful, and not going anywhere." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Mr. Garrett, you might want to inform your brother-in-law, the mayor, that his interested parties can stop circling. The Cole Ranch is not for sale. Not now, not ever." They walked out of that bank into afternoon sunlight that felt like vindication made tangible. Rafa was grinning like a wolf. "That," the old foreman said, "was beautiful, watching Garrett's face when you put that draft on the counter. That was 30 years of satisfaction right there." Mayor Alden was striding toward them, his face thunderous. "Miss Cole," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "I have just heard some remarkable claims about your recent activities." "Not claims," Arden said pleasantly. "Facts. I completed a successful cattle drive to Cheyenne, sold my herd at premium prices, paid off my bank loan in full, with capital to spare for expansion. Would you like to see the receipt?" "This is outrageous," Alden sputtered. "A woman traveling alone with men, engaging in such dangerous and improper—" "I was not alone," Arden interrupted. "I was with my crew conducting legitimate business, which last I checked is not illegal or improper in any legal sense that matters. The reputation of this town," Arden said, her voice cutting through his bluster, "will survive me being a successful rancher. In fact, it might even improve once people realize that women are capable of more than you give them credit for." A small crowd had gathered, Mrs. Alden among them, her face twisted with fury. "You have made powerful enemies with your stubbornness, Miss Cole," Alden said, lowering his voice to something that might have been meant as threatening, "and you have made a mistake assuming that being a woman made me weak." Arden's voice was clear and carried to every person watching. "I am not selling, I am not failing, I am not going anywhere. The Cole Ranch is staying in Cole hands, and there is not a thing you or your friends can do about it." She brushed past him without waiting for a response, her crew falling into step behind her. And for the first time since her father's death, Arden Cole did not care what Silver Bend thought. She had proved them wrong. She had done the impossible. And she had done it on her own terms. The ride back to the ranch felt different, the valley spreading before them in shades of amber and green, the late afternoon light turning everything golden. Arden felt the tension of the last months finally beginning to ease, replaced by a bone-deep satisfaction sweeter than anything she had ever experienced. The ranch house looked the same, solid, weathered home. But it felt different now. It was not just a burden she was carrying alone anymore. It was a success she had fought for and won, a legacy she had defended against impossible odds. "I am accepting your offer," she said to Calder as they unsaddled their horses in the barn. The words came out before she had consciously decided to speak them, but they felt right. "The partnership, if you are still serious about it." Calder paused, his hands stilling on his saddle. "I am serious." "Then we will draw up papers. Equal partnership in the coal ranch. Or maybe we rename it Brooks and Coal. Or Coal and Brooks." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "We can argue about the order later." "Ardan." Something in his voice made her turn to face him fully. He set aside the saddle and crossed to where she stood, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "I need you to understand something. I am not just investing in the ranch. I am investing in you, in this life, in building something that lasts." "I know," Ardan said quietly. "I do not think you do." Calder continued, his voice low and intense. "I am saying I want to stay. Not just for a season. Not just until the next opportunity comes along. I am saying I want this to be home. With you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication and promise. Arden's heart was racing, her hands trembling slightly with the enormity of what he was offering. This was more than partnership. This was commitment. This was choosing each other in a way that went beyond business arrangements. "I am not easy to live with," Arden said, needing him to understand. "I am stubborn and independent, and I do not always listen to advice. I have spent my whole life fighting to prove I am capable, and I am not going to stop just because." "I do not want you to stop," Calder interrupted gently. "I do not want you to be anything other than exactly who you are. That is the whole point, Ardan. I do not want to tame your wildness or fix your stubbornness or make you into something more acceptable to people like Mrs. Alden. I want to stand beside you while you keep being exactly who you have always been." "Why?" Arden asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you want that?" "Because 15 years ago I lost someone I loved. Fever took her before we could get married, and when she died, I decided it was safer to never care that much again. Safer to keep moving, keep my distance, never invest in anything that could be taken away." He reached out and took her hands in his, rough calluses catching against her own work-worn skin. "But then I met you, and you were so busy fighting for what you loved that you did not have time to be careful or safe. And I realized that living carefully is not the same as living well, that the risk of losing something matters less than the chance of having it in the first place." Ardan felt tears burning hot behind her eyes. "I am scared," she admitted, "of failing, of losing the ranch, of—" She could not finish the sentence. "Of losing me," Calder said gently. "I know. I am scared too. But I would rather be scared with you than safe and alone." The barn was quiet around them, dust motes dancing in the late afternoon light streaming through the gaps in the walls. "Stay then," Ardan said, the words coming out fierce and certain despite the tears on her cheeks. "Be my partner in the ranch and in everything else. Help me build something that lasts." Calder's smile was brilliant, transforming his weathered face into something that made Arden's breath catch. "I was hoping you would say that." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper, and Arden felt something in her chest finally unclench. This was what she had been fighting for all along, though she had not realized it until now. Not just the ranch, not just her father's legacy, but the chance to build a life on her own terms with someone who understood that her wildness was not something to be fixed. It was something to be celebrated. The following spring, Ardan found Calder working on a new corral for the horse breeding operation they had started. She walked up to him with purpose in her step and certainty in her heart. "Marry me," she said. Calder blinked. "What?" "Marry me," Arden repeated, more firmly this time. "I know it is not how it is supposed to go. The man is supposed to ask. The woman is supposed to wait. But I am tired of doing things the way they are supposed to be done. I want to marry you, Calder. I want to build this life together officially, legally, permanently." He kissed her, cutting off her words. And when he pulled back, he was laughing and shaking his head. "I was going to ask you," he said. "I have been carrying a ring around for 3 weeks, trying to find the right moment. You have a ring." Calder dug into his pocket and produced a simple gold band, worn but solid. It caught the morning light. "It was my grandmother's. Only valuable thing I own. I have been waiting for the perfect moment. But I should have known you would beat me to it." Ardan took the ring, turning it in her fingers, feeling the weight of history and promise it carried. "Is that a yes, then?" "That is a yes," Calder confirmed, "to all of it. Marriage, partnership, building this life together, everything." They married in late April in the small church in Silver Bend. Rafa and Tommy served as witnesses. Half the town attended out of curiosity, if not goodwill. Arden wore her mother's dress, altered to fit. Calder wore his best suit, which he had to buy special for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ardan felt something settle in her chest that she had been missing since her father died. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of something new. Partnership, family, home. The baby came on a cold March evening, 3 weeks before Ardan's due date. In the middle of the worst spring storm in 5 years, the roads were impassable with mud and melting snow. The doctor could not reach them. "I will ride for help," Tommy volunteered. "You will break your neck trying to get down that road," Ardan gasped between contractions. "It is too dangerous." "So what do we do?" Calder asked. And Arden had never heard that much fear in his voice before. "We manage," she said, trying to sound confident despite the pain. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years without doctors. We can do this." What followed were the longest 8 hours of Ardan's life. Calder stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, bringing water, helping her walk when she needed to move, catching her when her knees buckled. "I cannot," she sobbed at one point, exhausted and hurting and convinced this was how she would die. Her mother had died in childbirth. The fear of the same fate had haunted her for months. "I cannot do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Calder's voice was steady, even though his hands were shaking. "You are the strongest person I know. You drove cattle 200 miles through storms and wolf attacks. You faced down a town that wanted you to fail. You can do this." "This is different. This is just another impossible thing," Calder said, "and you have made a career out of doing impossible things. So do this one more. Bring our baby into the world. Show them what it means to be born to Ardan Brooks." She did, finally. As dawn was breaking over the snow-covered mountains, as the storm was beginning to clear, a sun, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way that mattered. Calder cut the cord with shaking hands, wrapped the baby in clean blankets, and placed him in Arden's arms with an expression of such profound love and relief that it made her start crying all over again. "You did it," he whispered, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We did it," Arden corrected, looking down at the tiny face of her son, at the dark hair and slate blue eyes that would probably turn gray like his father's. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding this small person who represented everything they had built and fought for, Arden knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said, "Thomas Calder Brooks. After both his grandfathers." Calder's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would have loved that, would have loved him." "He will know this ranch the way I did," Arden said, already planning ahead despite her exhaustion. "He will learn every inch of this land, understand what it means to fight for something worth keeping, and he will never doubt that he was born from love and courage." And two people who refused to let impossible odds stop them? The years that followed proved her right. The ranch prospered in ways that had seemed impossible during those dark months after Thomas Cole's death. They hired more permanent hands, built a second barn for the horses, negotiated contracts with buyers in Denver and Cheyenne that guaranteed steady income. The Cole Brooks Ranch became known throughout Colorado Territory as a source of quality cattle and superior horses. But it was the personal victories that meant more to Arden than any financial success. The day Mrs. Alden crossed the street rather than face her in town. The afternoon Mayor Alden stopped by the ranch with a stiff request to purchase horses, his pride clearly choking him. The evening Rafa told them he was retiring, not because he doubted their ability, but because he was finally confident they did not need him anymore. "You have built something real here," the old foreman said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thomas would be proud. I am proud. You took a dying ranch and turned it into an empire." "It is not an empire," Arden protested. But Calder squeezed her hand. "Not yet," he said, grinning. "Give us another 5 years." Years later, when Arden and Calder were silver-haired but still sharp as tacks, they would stand on that same porch and watch the sunset. Young Thomas was 15 now, tall and strong, already talking about going to agricultural college in Denver. "Tell me the story again," Thomas said one evening, though he had heard it dozens of times, about the mercantile and what Papa said. So Arden told him, the way she would tell their grandchildren years later, the way it would become family legend passed down through generations. "And then your father looked at Mrs. Alden and everyone else who had been mocking me," Arden said, reaching the part Thomas loved best. "And he said 5 words that changed my life. 'Good, you will match me just fine,' Thomas recited along with her, grinning. "Good, I will match you just fine," Arden corrected, squeezing Calder's hand, "because it was not about me matching him, it was about us matching each other, finding someone who understood that wild did not need to be tamed. That different did not mean wrong. That strength could look like a lot of things people did not expect." The sun touched the horizon, flooding the valley with light that turned everything golden. "I am glad Papa stayed," Thomas said. "Glad he saw what you were worth." "I am glad I let him stay," Arden replied. "Glad I was brave enough to accept help instead of insisting on doing everything alone. That was the hardest lesson. Learning that strength is not about isolation. It is about building something with people who share your vision." Calder pulled her closer. His voice was soft with decades of love. You know what I realized, Arden said, that day in the mercantile. You did not save me. You saw me clearly when everyone else was looking at what they expected to see. That was the real gift. Not rescue, but recognition. You saved yourself, Calder agreed. I just had the good sense to stand beside you while you did it. We saved each other, Arden corrected. You from running, me from fighting alone. That is what love is, I think. Not completing each other, but choosing to face everything together, building something that lasts, not because it is perfect, but because both people refuse to quit. The wild girl of Silver Bend had become a legend. The mysterious cowboy drifter had found his home, and together they had created something that proved what Calder had known from the very beginning. From that first moment in a dusty mercantile, when he had seen past the judgment to the courage underneath, they matched each other just fine, and in matching they had built something extraordinary. The sun set over the Colbrooks Ranch as it had set 10,000 times before, and would set 10,000 times more. The land endured, the legacy endured, and the story of courage and partnership and refusing to be anything other than exactly who you were meant to be. That story endured most of all. It would be told around campfires and dinner tables, in boardrooms and bunkhouses, wherever people gathered to talk about what was possible when you stopped letting fear make your decisions. The wild woman and the drifting cowboy who chose each other, chose courage, chose to build a life that honored both their strengths instead of apologizing for them. And somewhere in whatever place Thomas Cole's spirit had gone, Arden liked to think her father was watching, proud of what she had preserved, proud of what she had built beyond preservation, proud that his daughter had taken his legacy and transformed it into something even greater than he had imagined. The impossible had become reality. The outcast had become the pillar. The woman they called unfit had proven herself more capable than any of them. And it all started with 5 words from a stranger who understood what no one else could see. Good, you will match me just fine.